The world as we have created it is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking. That's Albert Einstein. Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today we're embarking on a truly fascinating and I think critical exploration of global analysis. You've sent us this really thought-provoking article from The Guardian. It's titled, "The Global Conflict, Old Thinking, New Alliances." Our mission, to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge from it, help you gain a fresh, maybe a more nuanced perspective on the current geopolitical landscape. Think of it as a deep dive into the very fabric of international relations, at least as presented by this compelling source.
And what's really fascinating here is how the article doesn't just, analyze current events. It fundamentally challenges conventional wisdom about global conflicts. It offers a pretty stark, maybe even audacious redefinition of past and present world wars, and crucially, their implications for major powers today. This deep dive is, I think, particularly relevant for those of you tracking current affairs for competitive exams, like the UPSC, for instance, but also for anyone just curious about understanding this incredibly complex dance of nations, especially when, long-held beliefs are being put into question like this.
That is a truly foundational redefinition the article proposes right off the bat. So, okay, how does the article then build on this, starting with its core argument about what a world war actually means?
Well, it kicks off by completely redefining what a world war truly is. It argues that the conflicts we usually call World War I and World War II, they were actually what it terms Euro-Atlantic wars, which, immediately raises a big question. What's the author's criteria for a true world war if our historical labels are, according to them, kind of misplaced?
Right, what makes it world then?
Exactly. The article argues it doesn't begin with overt military clashes or big headlines announcing war. Instead, it posits that a real global conflict starts silently, almost creeping higher and higher stealthily. It suggests it takes a while before its true nature is really understood globally.
So it's not about the initial spark, maybe, but the slow burn, the insidious spread, and the real global entanglement. And it doesn't stop there with the redefinition, does it? It talks about who participates.
Precisely. It makes a crucial distinction. A true world war, by its definition, involves free countries willingly engaged in conflict. Not, and this is key, not colonized nations being dragged into conflict by their colonial masters, who, the article notes, often endured even worse suffering. This perspective, it profoundly reshapes how we might view the nature of global conflict and who's really in it.
That's a profound rereading of history. But how does the article connect this rather audacious new definition of world war to the geopolitical landscape we're seeing today? What does it suggest is actually happening now?
Okay, so the piece asserts that the current global situation, the one characterized by these new alliances, is actually the beginning of the real World War I. It suggests that some European countries still hold an outdated view of themselves by labeling past conflicts as world wars when, according to this article, they were strictly Euro-Atlantic.
So it's not just semantics, it's a whole reframing.
Exactly. It's a powerful reframing of history and current events. It suggests that the current period isn't just, another phase of geopolitical tension, but the true start of a global struggle, one with really distinct characteristics from its predecessors. It's basically urging us to abandon that old thinking to really grasp what's emerging now.
Okay, so if that's the grand global redefinition of war, how does the article then zoom in? How does it talk about implications for individual nations? It seems to turn its focus pretty squarely on India next.
Yes, it does. It emphasizes India's unique strategic position, stating that choosing the right side will be critical for India. And it specifically mentions this happening under what it calls the seasoned leadership of PM Modi.
And it uses an analogy to make this point, right? Something about a business dynasty.
Yes, a very compelling one, almost anecdotal. It describes one brother who linked with China and apparently failed dismally, while the other brother plumped for the U.S. and prospered. Now, connecting this little story to the bigger picture, the article argues that shareholder losses from such business failures have a dampening effect on demand and hence on the overall economic growth of a country.
Whereas gains give buoyancy.
Exactly. Gains give buoyancy to the economy. So this isn't just abstract policy talk. The article uses this analogy to really starkly illustrate how geopolitical choices can directly translate into tangible economic gains or losses. For a nation's businesses, its citizens, it emphasizes that choosing sides isn't just diplomatic maneuvering, it's profoundly economic. It impacts the prosperity of millions.
And this isn't just high-level politics, then. It's about the economy, the prosperity of, as it says, hundreds of thousands of shareholders, and by extension, the whole nation. It paints a very clear, maybe even stark picture of the stakes involved for India. It suggests the nation's economic future is, well, intrinsically linked to its geopolitical alignment.
And what's fascinating is how it uses this very specific, kind of relatable example to argue for a much broader geopolitical strategy. It's making the case that economic success for a nation like India can really hinge on making the right strategic alliances. It suggests understanding and navigating these global shifts isn't just politics, it's about securing the economic future.
Okay. And speaking of alliances, the article then takes us back a bit, doesn't it, to a pivotal moment involving President Donald J. Trump and the G7. What's a key historical turning point the author identifies there, and how does it link to now?
Right. It rewinds to President Trump's admonishments, his warnings, to the European powers at the G7 summit hosted by Canada. It then discusses the G8's formation back in 2007, which importantly included Russia and its termination in 2014. Now, the article states this termination, this kicking Russia out, was due to pique shown by other G8 members over Russia's actions in Ukraine that year, specifically the partition of Ukraine, including Crimea and the Russian-speaking parts.
And the core argument is?
The core argument here is critical. The article posits that if Russia hadn't been pushed away from the G8 back then, it would have been on the side of the democracies as the New World War begins, rather than being, as it says, pushed into the arms of China.
That's a very strong claim, provocative even. Does the article explore why the European powers made that choice? Or does it just frame it as a clear miscalculation?
It presents it quite unequivocally as a strategic misstep. It argues that this forced, on the Russian side, embrace of China could still be undone, even now, but only if the counsel of President Trump and Prime Minister Modi regarding Russia were, and I quote, listened to by the hitherto obstinate Euro-focused European powers, even if it's belated. The author seems to believe this could fundamentally alter the balance of power in this new world war.
Wow. It even claims that such obstinacy led Europeans into their Euro-Atlantic wars, not real world wars. And it explicitly advocates for an armistice in the Ukraine-Russia war, not fighting to the last Ukrainian. It goes further, suggesting if Europeans and Canadians choose that latter course, they should be called the G6, because the U.S. under Trump would not be in the same tent on Ukraine. That really paints a picture of a deep, deep strategic split.
And we also see Japan mentioned as a key player in this potential shift. The article notes Japan has already moved away from that European Atlantic bloc, specifically with its resumption of oil purchases from Russia. It says this affirms Japan's identity as an Asian Indo-Pacific power rather than a European Atlantic power. This is highlighted as a really significant reorientation in the source, suggesting a broader realignment of global powers is maybe already happening, separate from those old East-West lines.
The article really doesn't mince words when it warns against what it calls a hedging strategy in wartime. It says trying to balance power equations leads to loss of balance and a subsequent fall. It then gets into very specific strategic actions being taken globally according to its perspective. What are some of these key maneuvers it points out?
Well, what's quite striking here is the assertion that President Trump is acting correctly in helping Israel to remove the communist regime in Iran. That refers to Iran's current leadership. The article deems this regime an existential enemy of Israel and an enemy of the democracies. That's strong language. And simultaneously, Trump is described as clearing choke points carefully assembled by China, doing so in the knowledge that, according to the article, a kinetic war with the U.S. and its partners has become practically inevitable.
So preemptive moves based on an assumed inevitability of conflict.
That's the picture it paints, highlighting the preemptive long-term strategic nature of current global maneuvers, basically anticipating future conflicts and acting now to secure advantageous positions.
And on the maritime front,
Yeah.
the Quad, that's Australia, India, Japan, U.S., we're told it should ensure the Malacca Straits get swept of Chinese efforts at domination. That's a critical shipping lane. And what about Moscow and all this?
For Moscow, the article states its interests mandate not joining the war on the side of China, but at the least neutrality. That's the minimum requirement from Moscow, according to this view.
Right. And the article emphasizes needing to, what was the word? Cajole.
Yes, cajole those European powers still clinging to what it calls the fiction that Russia can be made through the Ukraine war to fall apart 1991 style, like the Soviet Union did. The goal, according to the article, is to accept Trump's strategy of seeking to distance Moscow from Beijing. This could potentially lead to Russia being welcomed back, maybe first as at the least a neutral, until it becomes a full partner of the democracies.
So it's presented as a strategic imperative for the democracies in this evolving global conflict. Reevaluating the stance towards Russia seems central to the article's argument for countering China.
Precisely. For this world war, remember, that's the current global conflict in the article's terms to be more swiftly and comprehensively won by the partner democracies. The article is explicit. It states that not only India as a full partner, but Russia as a neutral is needed. It really underscores the critical roles of both nations in this unfolding scenario, essential pieces in this grand geopolitical chess game, as the author sees it.
Okay, and then there's a critique of leadership, particularly in Europe.
Yes, the piece critiques what it calls the antiquated thinking of some European leaders. It uses this really vivid analogy, an antiquated lift that had no stops in the German Foreign Ministry in Bonn. It uses this to symbolize what it sees as an outdated mindset of officials concerning Ukraine, specifically in Germany and France. And this, it raises an important question for all of us, doesn't it? How much do ingrained perspectives, historical narratives, maybe even bureaucratic inertia, how much do they hinder current decision-making, hinder adapting to new realities?
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that even seasoned leaders can maybe get stuck in historical frameworks that just don't apply anymore.
Exactly. That seems to be the article's point.
And building on that idea of outdated thinking, it also touches on UK Prime Minister Starmer. Something about dropping a page.
Right. It mentions Starmer being ridiculed for picking up a page Trump dropped. The author argues this ridicule was misguided. Sees Starmer's action as civil, maybe even endearing to Trump. But the conclusion drawn is quite significant. It's a strong call for Starmer to lead a European exit from the Ukraine war, arguing that prolonging the conflict just leads to greater human suffering and, crucially, pushes closer the adhesion of Russia with China, which, in the article's logic, goes against the strategic interests of the partner democracies. It basically accelerates the very scenario they might be trying to avoid.
That specific point really seems to encapsulate the article's core thesis, doesn't it? That current actions, driven by what it sees as old thinking, are inadvertently strengthening the very alliances that could challenge democratic powers in this emerging global conflict.
Yes, it's a provocative call for a complete strategic overhaul, a change in thinking, as the opening quote suggested.
So after all that, what does this mean for us, for you, our listener? Today, we've explored a perspective that, frankly, fundamentally redefines global conflicts. It stresses this vital shift from old ways of thinking to new strategic alliances. We've seen the critical role it assigns to choosing sides, the complex dynamics it describes involving Russia, and this call for bold, new leadership.
And this deep dive really reveals how deeply interconnected geopolitics, economics, and historical perceptions truly are, at least according to this source. It's a powerful reminder, I think, that our understanding of current events benefits immensely from critically examining the assumptions we hold and the narratives presented to us. For those of you especially preparing for competitive exams like the UPSC, understanding these kinds of nuanced viewpoints, the underlying arguments, even if you don't agree with them, is absolutely crucial. It gives you a comprehensive grasp of international relations and current affairs. This article definitely offers a distinct, if controversial, lens through which to analyze the current global churn.
Absolutely. And for all of you listening, what stands out to you from this discussion? What does this shifting global landscape and maybe this article's provocative take mean for your understanding of history, of international relations, and India's evolving role in the coming decades?
We really hope this deep dive has given you plenty to mull over, maybe challenged some preconceptions, offered a fresh lens, perhaps, to view current global affairs. It certainly pushes us to consider if our established definitions of conflict are still fit for purpose in a world that's changing so rapidly.
Indeed. If you found this discussion valuable, please do like this deep dive, subscribe to the deep dive for more insightful analyses like this one. And please leave a comment below with any further queries or thoughts you have. Your engagement really helps us tailor these deep dives even better for you. Until next time, keep digging deeper into the complexities of our world.